Hi, my name is Brian English, forum name Hyperbytes, and I'd like to welcome you back to this tutorial series. For those who have been following from day one, I apologize for the delay in these final modules, which was unfortunately outside my control. So just as a little recap to remind you where we were, we created a fairly complex structure in terms of tables and subtables, which would be a generalized template that would feed virtually all of the pages within this site, filtered on a particular page type that they required. So if I go into my server actions, remember we had an all page types server action within our admin section. If I fire that up, initially it's going to return, my apology, I picked the wrong one. That's the one we want. This is returning nothing because if we remember, our query requires a parameter to be sent of page type, and that differentiates which type of data is required. And because these are get parameters, we can fire up the server action, the API action, directly from the console, and then just manually add the parameter type that we require onto the end of that. So we're looking for page types of L, that's local attractions, and you'll see that we return some data there. There's actually 3 records in here, and we've got this subtable and joins type structure. So we've got the information about the main event, we have the actual images, and we also have any comments as well if there was comments attached to that. And I've got 3 records in there. So if remember, we've got this structure which is going to be enough for virtually every page, and we have these page types. Again, I like to do these things interactively rather than pushing up a PowerPoint page or whatever, so we can see what's happening. Then we see the 6 different types of page that will be produced using this. That's local attractions, our businesses, buy, sell, events, history, and member. Just as a side note, you can see this is nicely formatted JSON output. If you're doing that within your own browser, finding it's not as nicely structured as this, it is purely because I do have a extension added to my Chrome browser called JSON View, and that will format that nicely for you. So if we go back into Wappler, we're basically ready now to talk about making our first page, linking to that structure, pulling that data through, and then we are going to present that to the user in the format that we require. So let's have a look now at building our first front-end page. So we're going to go into our site manager. We've got the root highlighted. I'm going to right click, create a page, and we're just going to call that local. It's a content page, and the layout page for that will be main, so that's a non-secure, publicly available layout. And we're going to save that. First thing I'm going to do is add a server connect con page data, and we're going to select the action that we would require. Now I'm just going to stop there because actually I'm not going to. Sorry, I forgot to do something. We have the get page data query there, but that's actually protected by a security restrict, and we don't want to remove that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to go to the root of the APIs, and I'm going to then drag that to that root. So I'm going to move it so that becomes available to all of our actions. I'm going to now remove that security restrict so that becomes public. And while I'm save that, and then just to rename it, we're going to call that get page data public. Pop back into our page. Now we can add that server connect, get page data public. We'll see it offers us our input parameters, sort and directory added automatically. The page type that we need is going to be page type L. Regular save, that's the way I roll, I'm afraid. And then I'm going to now pop in a container. I always like to put the server connects above, just a habit, not a requirement. Column, and then first of all we're going to put a heading in. I'm going to call that local attractions. I'll pop another row below that. We're going to add a column, and then I'm now going to use the bootstrap table generator to generate a table within that column to display the different local attractions that are in the system. So I'm going to do a right click, I'm going to go down to generators, and I'm going to go in the bootstrap table. I'm going to populate that from our page data query. Select that. Sorry. I'm actually only going to display the title and nothing else at this stage, so I'm going to take all of those other records out, or sorry, those fields out. So we're just left with title. I'm going to make that responsive, I'm going to make it small, and I'm going to give it a stripe. Let's click OK, and there we are. We see the 3 pages are listed within the page immediately. So what we need to do now is look at how we're going to view the details of those particular attractions. And there are a number of different ways we can do that, and that's basically, we'll be doing this process 6 times over. On each occasion we will, in the future, we will start at this point. So remember how we got there. And I'm just going to show you different ways of presenting the data. I'm also going to be showing you different ways of presenting this list. So perhaps you, future, don't bother generating this bootstrap table, because I'll be doing it perhaps in a different way. And now we look at presenting the data, and we're looking at presenting the images. So in this particular occasion, I think I'll use the most basic method, and that is I'm going to add a button here, and I'm going to then use that button to fire up a modal, and that modal will show the contents of the page. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add a button into the end of these table entries, which we'll use to fire up the modal. So the easiest way is simply to add a new header in here and a new cell in here. We can take that header out. Always put a space in, just so there's something in there to find it easier to reselect it if ever you need to in the future. And in this cell I'm going to insert inside a button. We need to take that text out. Let's give the button some substance. Let's give it a color. We'll make that blue, and we'll make it small. We don't need great big massive buttons. And I think if we select the cell, I'm also going to right justify that button as well, so it's right at the very end. Let's save that. So it should have really change the name of the button as well. So next we need to think about creating our modal, and then we can link that modal to our page. So let's create a dynamic modal. Modal view attraction. We can then now go into the body and add whatever we need to do at when we're doing that. But for the moment, I'm just going to hang fire on that. Let's save that. I'm just going to literally prove that the button now will open that modal, simply by saying the toggle is going to be a modal, and the modal it's going to open is going to be the attraction. So we fire that up, and there we see we can open our modal without any problems at all. So what I need to do before we go any further is just go back to our server actions, because we're going to use a get single page data action as well. So I'm going to duplicate that, because of course that's an admin based one, and I'm going to just drag that up here with the rest, move it, get single page data. We're going to remove that security restrict. I'm just going to make sure we do definitely have the right one open. Remove the security restrict so that becomes public. I'm going to rename the action accordingly, just so we're clear exactly what it is. And while I remember, I'm going to go back to something else. I'm going to go to that get page data public action, and I'm going to make a change there. Forgot to do this the first run through. Remember, we have an online flag to say whether that particular record is actually online or not. And within the public facing, we need to make sure that those non-online records are not shown. So I'm going to add an extra condition in here for online is equal to 1, in other words, a Boolean true. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to do exactly the same now on the get single. So we need to make sure that we are only displaying records that are actually flagged to be shown online. The main reason for this is when you've got a page that's being built, it's not finished. You don't want the public to see this unfinished piece of work, so you will flag it as offline until you've finished it, and then you will be able to make it more public. So remember, we've still got the condition that we've got to send now the page content ID to that record, so that we can pull the individual record that we require. So let's go back to our local page. I'm now going to have to link that to, just while I'm doing this, I'm just mentioning there are other ways of doing this. I know some people favor using a data store, not a data store, sorry, a data detail to allow you to script work through it. I don't do it that way. I will be explaining at the end of this why I don't do it that way. But both are perfectly legitimate. It really is just down to personal preference. But I'm going to go into Server Connect. I'm going to call it con single attraction. We're going to pick the appropriate Server Connect, which is this new get single page data public. And our content ID for that will be left blank at this stage, because we're going to no auto load that. In other words, we're going to not run that server action on page load. We're going to do it interactively, and we're going to do it interactively through this button. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a click event to this. Dynamic events, mouse click. What we want to do is to, on the click of that button, we want to send a message to this get single page data API action saying please get record number, and we're going to send a unique page ID to that. So what we do is we'll find that get single attraction record. We'll click on load to reload it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pick the value of the page ID from the dynamic repeat, and that's really important. It must be the one that comes from the repeat, and we're going to select this page content ID. That means when we click that button, it will automatically pull the record that we require from the database and make it available within that server action. Now I've gone through this process, I'm going to explain to you why I tend not to use a data curator method, which you might have seen used by some other people who teach this, and that is purely because I'm quite obsessive about not pulling large amounts of data across a network if you don't need to. If you go into this get page data public action, remember it actually pulls quite a lot of data in there, and what I like to be able to do is to be able to get rid of anything that isn't strictly required. So what I would normally do is, see you have page content star here, I'm going to first of all replace that with all of the single field names, and there's two reasons for doing that, and I'll explain that to you when we're finished. So this is it's really at this stage I'm just trying to let you see how much data is pulled across from that server action, and then we can then really remove the star. Okay, we'll save that. So if we had 1,000 records in this system, then we're going to be pulling 1,000 records containing all of this data across the network, and certainly in the page that I've just created, we're only actually using the title. So all of that other data is totally unnecessary. Now if we pull the full record across and use the iterator method, we have to pull all of the subdata that's required for the modal or whatever method you're displaying it with as well, which means that becomes a very big server action. But we could, if we wanted, remove all of the superfluous entries, nice word Brian, from that list, and we could have just kept title and nothing else. So that's far less data to pull across a network, so it's a far better response time because it's a much smaller API action. However, once we've pulled the appropriate page ID over, because obviously that has to be in our data action, our server action, our API action, we then use the page data to pull over extra information. So only pulling that large record over once, we're not pulling 100 copies of it over simultaneously. So what I tend to say to people is, if you've only got a small data set, maybe 20 or 30 items, it probably isn't such a problem to use a data iterator method. Sorry, not data detail method. If you're pulling large records over, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands even, which is quite feasible in Wappler, then I would really recommend to use this method because it reduces the overhead of data moving about quite significantly. So we go back to our local. We've got our server action there, so now we need to just look at creating the appropriate data that we want to be able to see within that modal body. So let's click on it first, let's give it a title, and what I'm going to do is that heading I want to make dynamic. So we're going to data attributes, display, inner text we can use on that because we don't have any HTML formatting within it, and what we are going to be using is that single attraction query, and we're going to be using the title. We're just going to put the title into here. I'm going to add a container row and a column in here just because I like to. I'm going to get rid of that paragraph, which is totally redundant, and now I'm going to add a paragraph in there, and that paragraph again will have dynamic content, and we can go into our dynamic attributes display, this time HTML, because we're going to be displaying that description field which is created within Summer Notes, so it has embedded HTML, so we must use inner HTML, and we're going to create the single attraction data query description. We don't need that button, so we'll get rid of that. Let's save that, and then let's just fire up the page and make sure I've got everything right. So let's fire up the page, data attractions, and there we are. We see we've got the Modal opens showing the title of that. Look at Kill the Water. We can see again the text description shown within that modal. So let's do a little bit of tidy up of it now, and then once we've tidied it up, we'll add a little bit more data in as well, and then we can start looking at images. So let's pop back into Wappler. We have our modal here, and what I need to do now is just to add an image in. I'll add that in before the paragraph. There's our image action. Now that's going to be dynamic, so let's make sure that we add the image through dynamic attributes. We collect our image source. Now I don't know whether you can remember, it might be worth checking up if you don't, but what the path was to our images. Remember, we have this quirk with Node where your upload action loads it to the root folder, but when you read it back, you don't need that /public bit at the start. So it's just the way Node works, I'm afraid. We're going to let's uploads, and then we're going to be looking at page images /. And if you remember, the next bit was the ID of the page itself, because each image is stored within a folder. So we're going to be picking that single connect attraction API action. I'm going to selecting page content from there. Then next is we're going to be looking at the full image, and then last but not least, we're going to be adding in images image link. Now let's just stay right from the start here that sorry, there should be a final slash there. Because we're picking it from the picker in this way, it's not within a repeat that will always display the first image in a list. Remember, we did the image sorter. Whichever is the first image within that sorter will be the image that will be displayed in this particular place, and only one image. So I'm using it as a header image. So let's just select that. That should now be the image correct. And let's just make that responsive, so make sure that it fits within our modal comfortably. I like to click thumbnail. It doesn't actually make it into a thumbnail. What it does is it puts a nice little border around it. So let's save that. Let's fire that up in the browser. Let's hit Show in, and we see we have a problem. So let's have a look and just see what our path is there. We've forgotten a slash between page images and the ID there. So let's just go back into that, and we'll see there we just need a slash in there. Save that, fire it up again, show in, and there we have a nicely formatted, nicely sized primary image. That's a primary image that we have set for show in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop a box in underneath this to show all of the images. We can do it in a number of ways. We can do it with a masonry object. We can do it as a simple slideshow. We can do it with a swiper or a simple list, I suppose, if we really wanted to. Lots of options there, and what we'll do is we will explore these different options as we work through from our first page, as we're doing now, through to our final presentation page. Okay, so let's add, I think, a simple slideshow onto this first page. Keeping things very simple, and we'll build up to the more complex as we go along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert after components, and we're going to select the slideshow component because it's really easy to use. We're going to be using dynamic slides, and our slide source will be that repeat within our single attraction server action query, our image repeat here. So what's our image? Well, remember we already have this path in our heads from before. So we got uploads, some people do store the entire path within the database to save them doing this. Again, not something I do, purely because I can sometimes have 4 or 5 different variants of a image within an upload action, and I don't really want to be storing 5 separate paths when the only difference is really perhaps large, mid, small, thumb, cover. So we do this manually here. Yeah, it's a little bit more work, but it allows us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we're doing. So we're going to have the page content ID next, and then we're going to do full, and then we're going to do image link. Now I've noticed that sometimes when you add the dynamic option to the text string, it does sometimes take the last character out. I think that's, well, I know nowadays definitely why that page images / disappeared last time. It was purely because the Wappler had removed that trailing / out. I will put a bug report in about that. And thumb, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to have /uploads page images / page ID, come on, / full, no cover, / and then lastly the image link. Select that. We can give it an optional title, description, and even a link for a click through if we want. I'm not going to do that at this stage, but what I am going to do is make sure that these images let's start them at a random point just for the fun of it. We show a previous next button on them as well, and let's save that. So let's see what happens if I fire that up now. Let's look at Herschel Lane. We'll see now we have slideshow running at the bottom. We could actually now remove that static image completely if we really wanted and just purely have a slideshow in there, bearing in mind that the whole point of this exercise is not really to produce a website but to show you different techniques. Then obviously I'll try and use as many techniques as possible. So let's close that. I'm just going to go now back into Wappler. Let's do a little bit of a tidy up. I want to give that header a bit of colour, so let's make it blue. I prefer on blue, I tend to prefer the text to be white, and let's put that paragraph into a faded grey panel. So let's put it into white. Let's save that, fire it up, and now we see that our modal is blue headed. The other thing we can do, perhaps if you preferred, is that we can make that modal bigger because it is quite small there. So let's make it large, or even potentially extra large if you have a lot of text in there that you want to be able to show. We have a scrollable option. Those obviously often useful if you have a lot of text. And then let's save that. Then the last thing that I like to do is just do a quick centered. Let's have a bit of a fading effect, and Let's now fire that up again. Let's look at Kill the Water this time. You'll see that the image now is gone to its maximum size that it'll work to. We've got our slider, which is much bigger images, so we probably want to center that one up as well if we're going to do that. So let's have a look at our modal body, container, row, column. In actual fact, I'm going to add another row in there, another column, and I'm going to drag that slider into a different column and row, just to keep them separate, because I want to now center that column the center of the image. So we're going to center that. Let's save. Yes, I'm just playing now, but it's play with a learning outcome, and that's the important thing. And now you see we've got that first image centered, and we've got our slideshow running at the bottom. And you can see these images are probably a little bit grainy because they're being blown up from 640 size up to probably there something like 1040. So they're getting a bit grainy. So you've got to remember that when you're server action, when you're scaling your image, how big do you want it at the front end? It might be better that we had a version of these images that were 1024 wide. But that really is a matter for yourselves, or perhaps we just make that modal a little bit smaller, and that would allow us to resolve the problem without having to change anything. So we'll change that to large, for instance. Let's save that. And you'll see, because we have changed the size of the modal, we change the size of that slideshow, and then the image quality improves. So say we can either improve the image quality, or we can make the image smaller, therefore it looks less grainy. So there is our very simple first page for local attractions. I'm going to leave you to look at just tidying these up, a bit of margin at the top there perhaps, just to tidy things. I noticed there that because I've centered that picture, I've also centered the text, so we probably want to create another row and column, drop that text into that a new row and column, and then left align that so we don't have the center text. We've now just got to look and think, well, what's that going to look like on a mobile device? Is this modal going to be too big? Remember we looked at responsive earlier, so always mobile first. So you're going to go to here first and look at it. Should scale automatically for you. You look at your mode, and then you scale up your different devices, and you can resize those columns. But as these are single columns, there's no parallel columns running. There's not really anything that needs to be resized to allow it to be responsive, because a single column by definition will always be responsive. So that's our local page. Only thing that remains is probably to link it in the menu. So that's places to go and see, nav item. Let's look at our picker. Let's link it to local. Now here's an interesting one, and I'm not entirely sure about this one. I'm going to be perfectly honest. If we click local, then certainly our page load will be cleaner and more efficient, because we are not loading the layout page again. However, I'm not always entirely sure whether this adversely impacts the SEO side of things, not having a full page load. I'm not going to tell you to do this either way. My gut feeling is I'm now leaning towards internal, in other words non-refreshed layout pages within an admin console, because it looks much cleaner. But I'm leaning towards full page loads in a public facing environment, so that we see a full refresh of the SEO should be refreshed anyway, but It may well be that the Google will get a better view of what's going on that way. So if you want to have a clean refresh so that the layout page, the menu doesn't refresh, just the content is, click internal, or you can leave that off yourself. And that concludes the basic intro into local events, local attractions, and we'll look at another one of these options and do something a little bit more sophisticated next. So thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next module.